Why so many tattoos, old man? Did you run out of paper, or did you just lose a lot of bets in port? The question hung in the air of the briefing room like the smell of ozone before a lightning strike. It came from the back row, delivered with a smirk by Jake Rodriguez, a 23-year-old specimen of physical perfection who had just graduated top of his bud class. He was sitting with his arms crossed, biceps bulging against his crisp uniform, surrounded by 20 other fresh-faced SEAL candidates who looked like they could chew through steel cable. At the front of the room stood the man he was addressing, a 60-year-old guest instructor named Marcus. Didn't look like a warrior. He looked like a drifter. His hair was thinning and gray. His face was a road map of deep, weathered lines. And he wore a simple black t-shirt that exposed arms covered in faded dark chaotic ink. To Rodriguez, this guy looked like a relic, a biker who had wandered onto the base by mistake. But Rodriguez was about to learn that there are predators in the deep ocean that don't need to look pretty to kill. If you believe that wisdom is earned through blood and that we should respect the warriors who paved the way, stop what you're doing, hit the like button, and type respect in the comments right now. Let's see who understands the true cost of freedom. The briefing room at the Naval Special Warfare Center in Coronado was usually a place of high-tech strategy and cutting-edge warfare. The air conditioning hummed a low constant note, keeping the temperature at a crisp 68 degrees to counteract the San Diego heat outside. The walls were lined with digital maps, satellite imagery, and the ethos of the teams. The only easy day was yesterday. The men sitting in the tiered seats were the new breed. They were faster, stronger, and smarter than any generation before them. They had trained with drones, advanced ballistics, and digital comms. They felt invincible. Then Marcus had walked in. He carried no laptop, no PowerPoint clicker, no stack of manuals. He carried a paper cup of coffee and a battered notebook that looked like it had been soaked in salt water and dried in the sun a dozen times. He walked with a slight limp, a hitch in his left side that he didn't try to hide. He placed his coffee on the podium and stood there silently scanning the room for a full minute. His eyes were the color of slate, flat and unreadable. That was when Rodriguez had spoken up. The recruits were restless. They had expected a Tier 1 operator, someone straight from the sandbox with a beard and a loadout of stories about taking down high-value targets with suppressed carbines. Instead, they got a guy who looked like he fixed HVAC units in the 1980s. Rodriguez's question was meant to break the tension. A little alpha dog flexed to show the room he wasn't intimidated by the silence. A few of the other guys chuckled, a low rumble of agreement. The ink on Marcus's arms was ugly. It wasn't the artistic sleeves you see today. It was dark, blotchy, and looked painful. There were jagged lines, coordinates, and crude symbols that blurred into one another. Marcus didn't flinch at the insult. He didn't even look angry. He slowly took a sip of his coffee, set it down, and looked directly at Rodriguez. The silence that followed stretched out, becoming uncomfortable. The chuckles died away. "You like the artwork, son?" Marcus asked. His voice was soft, sounding like tires rolling over gravel. Rodriguez shrugged, leaning back in his chair, confident in his status as the new elite. "Just curious. Usually, we keep it professional. That looks chaotic, like a scrapbook with no order." Marcus nodded slowly. He stepped away from the podium. He walked down the center aisle, moving closer to the recruits. As he got closer, the men could see the texture of his skin. It wasn't just ink. Beneath the tattoos were ridges, scars, burn marks that the ink had been used to color over. "Chaotic," Marcus repeated. "That's a good word for it. War is chaos. You boys train for the grid. You train for the plan, but the plan is the first casualty of contact." He stopped right in front of Rodriguez's desk. Rodriguez sat up a little straighter, his arrogance flickering for a split second as he realized the old man's eyes were devoid of fear. They were the eyes of a shark, dead calm and utterly focused. "You asked why so many," Marcus said. He rolled his left shoulder forward, pointing to a faded, jagged black line that wrapped around his forearm like a snake. "You see this one? It looks like a mistake. A bad line drawn by a drunk artist." Rodriguez looked at it. "What is it?" "A river. It's a timeline." Marcus said 1989, Operation Just Cause, Panama. "We were tasked with securing Pitala Airfield. The intel was wrong. We weren't walking into a lightly guarded strip. We were walking into a meat grinder. We were pinned down on the tarmac. No cover. Taking heavy machine gun fire from 3 sides. My swim buddy, a kid named Danny, took a round to the femoral artery. In the first 30 seconds, the room went quiet. The air conditioning seemed to get louder. I dragged him behind the landing gear of a private jet. Marcus continued, his voice devoid of drama, just stating facts. I put a tourniquet on him, but the fire was too heavy. We were trapped for 4 hours. This tattoo, I did it myself with a needle and India ink. 3 days later, it traces the path of the blood that ran across the tarmac. It reminds me that plans fail, and when they do, you don't panic. You hold the line. Rodriguez swallowed. He didn't say anything. Marcus rolled up his other sleeve. He pointed to a cluster of 3 stars on his right bicep. They were uneven, the points dull. How about these? You think these are for style? Maybe I wanted to look like a general. No one laughed. 1993 Mogadishu. The word hit the room like a physical weight. Every SEAL knew the anti-history. But reading about it in a book and standing in front of a ghost who was there were 2 different things. We weren't supposed to be the main effort. We were support. But when the birds went down, everything shifted. We moved through the city on foot. It was a 360 degrees ambush. We ran out of water. We ran out of ammo. We almost ran out of blood. He tapped the stars. 3 men in my squad didn't make it back to the hangar. I put these here to cover the shrapnel scars I took in my arm. Pulling a Ranger out of a burning Humvee. Every time I lift something heavy, the scar tissue pulls. It hurts. And I'm glad it hurts because the pain reminds me that I'm still here and they aren't. Marcus took a step back, addressing the whole room now. The recruits were leaning forward, their eyes wide. The arrogance was gone, replaced by a dawning realization of who they were sitting in the presence of. You look at me and you see an old man, Marcus said, his voice rising slightly, filling the room with authority. You see faded ink and gray hair. You ask why so many tattoos. The answer is simple. I have so many tattoos because I have come home so many times. Each one of these is a receipt. For a life I lived, a death I dodged, or a brother I buried. He pointed to a complex, faded geometric shape on his wrist. Afghanistan, 2002. Taku, the mountains. The air was so thin you felt like you were breathing through a straw. We were hunting shadows in the caves. We were alone. No drone support, no SATCOM, just 6 of us and the cold. We were out there for 12 days. We ran out of food on day 4. We ate snow and stayed awake on pure hate. This mark, it's the constellation of Orion. It was the only thing I could see from the position where I lay for 48 hours waiting for a sniper to make a mistake. He finally did. Marcus looked back at Rodriguez. You have clean skin, Jake. You have bright eyes and a strong back. You know the theory of war. You know the tactics, but you don't know the weight. You haven't carried the weight yet. Rodriguez looked down at his hands. His face was red, not with anger, but with shame. I didn't know, Master Chief. I apologize. I'm not a Master Chief anymore, Marcus said softly. I am just Marcus. The rank stayed on the uniform when I took it off. The ink stayed on the skin. Just then, the heavy steel door at the back of the room opened. The commander in full dress whites walked in. It was Commander Hayes, the commanding officer of the entire training group. The recruits instinctively jumped to their feet, snapping to attention. On deck, Commander Hayes waved a hand. As you were, sit down. Hayes walked to the front of the room. He didn't look at the recruits. He looked at Marcus. The commander's face broke into a look of profound respect, bordering on reverence. He extended a hand. Marcus, Hayes said warmly. I wasn't sure you'd actually come. I said I would, sir, Marcus replied, shaking the hand. Hayes turned to the class. He saw the stunned expressions. He saw the tension. He looked at Rodriguez, who was looking at the floor. I see you've met the legend, Hayes said. Gentlemen, you are looking at the founding father of the tactical survival program you are currently studying. Before we had GPS, before we had thermal drones, we had men like Marcus Stone. He was a member of SEAL Team 6 before half of you were born. He has operated in more countries than you can name. He's the only man I know who has been awarded the Navy Cross twice. A collective gasp went through the room. The Navy Cross twice. That put him in the realm of mythology. I asked him to come here today not to teach you how to shoot. Hayes continued, you already know how to shoot. I asked him here to teach you how to endure because the technology breaks, the batteries die, the comms go down, and when that happens, all you have left is what is inside your chest and who is standing next to you. Hayes looked at Marcus's arms. And I see he's already started the history lesson. Those tattoos are the only map you need to understand what sacrifice looks like. Hayes nodded to Marcus and stepped to the side, relinquishing the floor. The hierarchy was clear. In this room, the commander was in charge, but Marcus was the master. Marcus walked back to the podium. He picked up his coffee, which was now cold. He looked at Rodriguez again. The young ensign looked like he wanted to crawl under his desk. "Stand up, son," Marcus said. Rodriguez stood up, stiff and nervous. "Sir, don't sir me. I work for a living," Marcus said, a ghost of a smile touching his lips. "You asked a question. It was a fair question. We judge what we see. It's human nature. But in this line of work, judgment gets you killed. You have to look deeper. You have to look at the eyes, not the paint job." Marcus rolled down his sleeves, covering the history, covering the scars. He became just an old man in a black t-shirt again. "You want to know the real reason why I have so many tattoos?" Marcus asked, his voice barely a whisper, forcing everyone to lean in. "Yes, Master Chief," Rodriguez said. "It's to cover up the parts of me that are missing," Marcus said. "Every time I lost a piece of my soul, I painted over it so I wouldn't have to look at the empty space. You boys are blank canvases. You're perfect. My job is to teach you how to stay that way for as long as possible. But make no mistake, if you do this job right, if you do it long enough, you will get marked. Maybe not with ink, but you will get marked." He picked up a piece of chalk and turned to the blackboard. He drew a simple vertical line. "This is you," he said. He drew a jagged, chaotic circle around it. "This is the world." He turned back to them. "Survival isn't about conquering the world. It's about keeping that line straight while the world tries to bend it. Now, open your notebooks. We're going to talk about water procurement in a hostile urban environment. And I don't want to hear a single word about apps or filters. We're going to talk about how to stay alive when the world wants you dead." The room was electric. The recruits opened their notebooks with a fervor they had never shown before. Pens hovered over paper, ready to capture every syllable. Rodriguez sat there, his eyes glued to Marcus. He wasn't looking at a biker anymore. He was looking at a prophet. For the next 3 hours, Marcus spoke. He didn't use jargon. He didn't use buzzwords. He told stories of thirst so deep it made you hallucinate. He spoke of hiding in sewage pipes to avoid patrols. He spoke of the psychological weight of being hunted. And through it all, the recruit saw the tattoos in a new light. When Marcus gestured, the jagged lines on his arms seemed to move, animating the stories. The ink wasn't graffiti. It was a living document of human endurance. When the lecture ended, nobody moved to leave. The dismissal bell rang, but they sat there. Marcus packed up his battered notebook. He finished his cold coffee. He looked at the class one last time. "Class dismissed," he said. As he walked toward the door, Rodriguez shot up from his seat. He practically ran down the aisle. "Master Chief Marcus, wait." Rodriguez stammered. Marcus stopped and turned. Rodriguez extended his hand. "Thank you. I'll never judge a book by its cover again. I promise." Marcus took the hand. His grip was iron, surprisingly strong for a man who looked so frail. He pulled Rodriguez in slightly, looking him dead in the eye. "Don't worry about the book, kid," Marcus said. "Just worry about the story you're going to write. Make it a good one, and try to keep the ink off your skin if you can. It hurts like hell when it rains." Marcus winked, a flash of the young, wild warrior he once was, and walked out into the bright California sun. The room remained quiet for a long time after he left. The recruits looked at each other, then at their own unmarked arms. They gathered their things slowly with a new heaviness in their movements. They had walked in thinking they were the apex predators. They walked out realizing they were just cubs who had been lucky enough to meet the lion. Respect isn't about how shiny your boots are or how many followers you have. It isn't about talking the loudest in the room. Respect is the quiet acknowledgement of the burdens others carry. It's understanding that every scar has a story and every gray hair is a lesson learned the hard way. We live in a world that is quick to judge, quick to dismiss the old, the worn, and the quiet. But as Marcus showed those recruits, sometimes the quietest man in the room is the one who has made the most noise in history. So the next time you see an old-timer with faded tattoos or a veteran walking with a limp, don't stare. Don't judge. Nod your head. Say thank you. Because the freedom you enjoy. 2. Sit here and watch this. The safety of your home was paid for in ink and blood by men like him. If you stand with our veterans, if you honor the old guard, and if you believe that true strength is silent, subscribe to the channel. Share this story to keep the legacy alive. I'll see you in the next one. Stay strong. 3 weeks later, Jake Rodriguez found himself lying flat on his stomach in the mud at 0400 hours, rain driving down like ice needles against his exposed neck. The advanced survival course had begun the day after Marcus Stone's visit, and every lesson felt like a direct continuation of that briefing room revelation. The instructors pushed harder, demanded more, and Rodriguez understood why. He was no longer training to be invincible. He was training to endure. The exercise was simple in concept, brutal in execution. 36 hours in the California mountains with nothing but a knife, a compass, and the clothes on their backs. No food, no shelter, no communication. Just survival. Rodriguez's team consisted of 8 men, all of whom had been in that room when Marcus spoke. They moved through the wilderness like ghosts, each carrying the weight of newfound respect for what they didn't know. Rodriguez remembered Marcus's words about Afghanistan, about eating snow and staying awake on pure hate. Now, as his stomach cramped with hunger and his boots squelched through ankle-deep mud, those words took on a visceral meaning. This wasn't a video game. This wasn't theoretical. This was the beginning of understanding what Marcus had tried to teach them. The constellation of Orion hung overhead, barely visible through the storm clouds. Rodriguez found himself staring at it, thinking about Marcus lying in those mountains for 48 hours, waiting for a sniper to make a mistake. The stars looked different now, less romantic, more like navigation tools for men who had nowhere else to turn. On the second day, when Rodriguez's team found themselves pinned down by instructors with paintball guns in a mock ambush scenario, he thought about Mogadishu, about 3 men who didn't make it back to the hangar. The paintballs stung like angry wasps, but Rodriguez held his position, coordinated his team's movement, and completed the objective. Not because he was fearless, but because he finally understood the difference between courage and recklessness. The debrief came at dawn on the 3rd day. Rodriguez and his teammates sat in a circle around a small fire, their faces gaunt with exhaustion, their uniforms torn and filthy. The lead instructor, a weathered staff sergeant named Cole, looked at each of them individually before speaking. You gentlemen have just completed the first phase of what Marcus Stone went through as a young operator. He did this for real, with real bullets, in real wars, for real stakes. What you felt out there, that fear, that hunger, that desperation, that's just the beginning. Rodriguez raised his hand. Staff Sergeant, how do we know if we're ready? How do we know if we can carry that weight Marcus talked about? Cole smiled, a rare expression on his usually stone face. You don't know, Rodriguez. That's the point. Marcus Stone didn't know either when he first deployed to Panama. None of them did. Readiness isn't something you achieve. It's something you discover under fire. What Marcus was trying to tell you is that the real test isn't whether you're ready. The real test is whether you'll keep going when you discover you're not. The weeks that followed blurred together in a haze of advanced training scenarios. Close quarters combat in mock urban environments. Underwater demolitions in the frigid Pacific. Long-range reconnaissance missions that pushed the limits of human endurance. Each evolution was designed to strip away another layer of ego, another assumption about what it meant to be elite. Rodriguez found himself changing in ways he hadn't expected. The swagger remained, but it was tempered now with humility. The confidence remained, but it was grounded in competence rather than arrogance. He started paying attention to the older instructors, the ones with scars and 1,000-yard stares, the ones who spoke softly but commanded absolute respect. During a particularly brutal combat diving exercise, when Rodriguez's oxygen ran low and panic clawed at the edges of his consciousness, he thought about Marcus's tattoo, the jagged line that traced the path of blood across a tarmac in Panama. Marcus had been trapped for 4 hours, watching his swim buddy bleed, unable to do anything but hold the line. Rodriguez forced himself to breathe slowly, conserve his air, and complete the mission. Not because he wasn't afraid, but because fear was just another variable to manage. It was during the advanced marksmanship phase that Rodriguez first met Sarah Chun, a Marine sniper instructor brought in to teach precision shooting to the SEAL candidates. Chun was small, maybe 5'4", with the kind of quiet intensity that made grown men pay attention. She had served 3 tours in Afghanistan, and her reputation for long-range accuracy was legendary among special operations communities. The first thing Chen did was have the candidates zero their rifles at 1,000 yards. Half the class, Rodriguez included, couldn't even hit the target. Chen watched through her spotting scope, taking notes, saying nothing. When the shooting was finished, she stood before the group with their targets spread out on a table. "Pathetic," she said without emotion. "You think you're snipers because you can hit a man-sized target at 300 meters. Marcus Stone killed enemy combatants at ranges that would make your head spin. In Afghanistan, in Iraq, in places you'll never hear about on the news. The difference between you and him isn't talent. It's patience, discipline, and understanding that every shot you take might be the difference between your teammates going home or going home in a box." Over the following weeks, Chen broke down everything Rodriguez thought he knew about shooting. Breathing techniques that required meditation-like focus. Ballistics calculations that accounted for wind, temperature, humidity, and elevation. Most importantly, the mental discipline to remain calm when lives depended on precision. Rodriguez found himself staying after hours, practicing on the range until his fingers were numb with cold. Chen would often be there too, working with other candidates, her own rifle always within arm's reach. During one of these evening sessions, Rodriguez finally worked up the courage to ask her about combat. "Instructor Chen, what was it like? The first time you had to take a shot? I mean, for real." Chen was quiet for a long moment, adjusting the scope on her rifle. She looked at Rodriguez with eyes that had seen too much. "The first time is never what you expect," she said. "You train for it. You prepare for it. But when the moment comes, when you're looking at a human being through your scope and you know that pulling that trigger means ending a life, everything changes. The mechanics are the same. Breathe, aim, squeeze. But the weight is different. The weight is everything." She paused, looking out at the targets in the distance. Marcus Stone understands that weight. It's why he has those tattoos. Each one is a reminder of the responsibility we carry. The responsibility to be perfect when it matters most, because imperfection means good people die. Rodriguez nodded, beginning to understand what Marcus had meant about the weight. It wasn't just about physical endurance or mental toughness. It was about carrying the lives of others, about making decisions under pressure when failure wasn't an option, about living with the consequences of those decisions for the rest of your life. The culmination of the advanced training came in the form of a final exercise that lasted 2 weeks. The candidates were divided into foreman teams and given a series of objectives across different terrains and scenarios: urban assault, wilderness survival, maritime operations, and long-range reconnaissance. Each objective built on the last, each success raising the stakes for the next challenge. Rodriguez's team consisted of himself, Tommy Park, a Korean-American explosives expert from San Diego, Luis Santos, a Puerto Rican communications specialist who could hack into anything electronic, and Michael Thompson, a former college football player from Texas whose specialty was close-quarters combat. They had trained together for months, developing the kind of trust and communication that only comes from shared suffering. The first objective took them into the Mojave Desert, where they had to locate and neutralize a mock terrorist camp while avoiding roving patrols of instructors playing enemy forces. The temperature during the day reached 115 degrees. At night, it dropped to near freezing. They had to move only in darkness, hide during the day, and complete their mission within 72 hours. On the second night, lying in a hide site overlooking their target, Rodriguez felt something click into place. The fear was still there, the uncertainty, the weight of responsibility for his teammates. But now it felt manageable. Not easier, but purposeful. He understood what Marcus had been trying to teach them. The tattoos weren't just reminders of the past. They were preparation for the future. The urban assault phase took place in a mock city built specifically for training. Multi-story buildings, narrow alleyways, rooftops connected by zip lines and rappelling points. The scenario involved hostage rescue, with instructors playing both hostages and terrorists. Live ammunition was replaced with paintball rounds, but the tactics were real, the pressure genuine. Rodriguez found himself in the role of team leader for this phase, coordinating movement between his teammates, making split-second decisions that could mean the difference between mission success and catastrophic failure. When Santos took a paintball round to the chest while clearing a stairwell, Rodriguez had to decide whether to continue the mission or abort to help his teammate. He thought about Marcus and Mogadishu, about the 3 men who didn't make it back to the hangar, about the choice between completing the mission and saving lives. Rodriguez made the call to continue, trusting Santos to manage his own situation while the team pressed forward to rescue the hostages. It was the right choice tactically, but it felt like swallowing broken glass. Later, during the debrief, the lead instructor commended Rodriguez for his decision-making under pressure. But Rodriguez couldn't shake the feeling that he was beginning to understand the cost of leadership in ways he'd never wanted to comprehend. Every choice carried weight. Every decision had consequences. Every success came at a price that wasn't always immediately apparent. The maritime phase pushed them into the frigid Pacific Ocean, where they had to infiltrate a target from underwater, plant mock explosives, and extract without being detected. The water was so cold that hypothermia became a real concern within minutes. Rodriguez's team had to work in pairs, monitoring each other for signs of cold water shock while maintaining mission focus. Thompson began showing signs of distress halfway through the approach. His movements became sluggish, his responses delayed. Rodriguez faced another leadership decision: continue the mission with a compromised teammate or abort and risk mission failure. This time, he made the call to abort, getting Thompson to safety before the situation became life-threatening. The debrief for this exercise was different. The instructor, a former SEAL named Master Chief Peterson, looked at Rodriguez with something approaching respect. You made the right call, Rodriguez. Mission success means nothing if you lose your people. Marcus Stone would approve of that decision. There are times when completing the objective matters most, and times when bringing everyone home is the only objective that counts. Learning to tell the difference is what separates leaders from managers. The final phase was long-range reconnaissance, a solo operation that would test everything they had learned over the previous months. Each candidate was given a target to observe and report on for 5 days in the mountains of Northern California. They would be completely alone, with no support, no backup, and no margin for error. Rodriguez's target was a mock enemy communications facility built in a remote valley. His mission was to observe all activity, identify key personnel, and report back with actionable intelligence. He had to remain undetected for the entire duration while gathering information that could be used to plan a future strike. The first 2 days were a study in tedium and discomfort. Rodriguez lay in a concealed position on a ridgeline 800 meters from the target, using his scope to track movement patterns and identify personnel. He ate cold rations, slept in 2-hour intervals, and fought off the mental fatigue that came with extended periods of inactivity. On the 3rd day, a storm moved through the area. Rain turned to sleet, then to snow as the temperature dropped. Rodriguez's position became a test of pure endurance. He thought about Marcus in Afghanistan, about the constellation of Orion being the only thing visible from his position during a 48-hour wait, about staying awake on pure hate. Rodriguez didn't have hate to sustain him. Instead, he had purpose. He had teammates depending on the intelligence he was gathering. He had instructors who were testing his ability to endure conditions that would break most people. Most importantly, he had a new understanding of what it meant to carry the weight that Marcus had talked about. By the 5th day, Rodriguez had compiled a detailed report on enemy personnel, movement patterns, security protocols, and vulnerabilities. More importantly, he had survived 5 days alone in conditions that pushed him to the edge of his physical and mental capabilities. When the extraction helicopter arrived, Rodriguez felt something he hadn't expected. Not relief, but confidence. Not in his invincibility, but in his capacity to endure. The graduation ceremony for the advanced course took place on a Friday afternoon in December. 24 candidates had started the program. 18 completed it. Rodriguez stood with his classmates in dress blues, feeling the weight of their new qualifications and the responsibility that came with them. But the ceremony wasn't what mattered to Rodriguez. What mattered was the conversation he had with Marcus Stone afterward. Marcus had returned to present the graduation certificates, and Rodriguez had asked him for a private word. They walked together along the beach near the Naval Special Warfare Center, the sound of waves providing a backdrop for their conversation. Rodriguez had questions about leadership, about the cost of command, about how to carry the weight that Marcus had described. Marcus listened without interrupting, his weathered face thoughtful as Rodriguez described his experiences during the training, his decisions under pressure, his growing understanding of responsibility. When Rodriguez finished, Marcus was quiet for a long moment. "You're asking the right questions, Rodriguez. That's more than most people do. But here's the thing about the weight I talked about. It's not something you carry alone. Every man you lead, every teammate you serve with, they carry part of it too. The burden isn't about individual strength. It's about collective responsibility." Marcus stopped walking and turned to face Rodriguez. "You think my tattoos are about the missions I've been on, the places I've served, the men I've lost. But they're really about the men I've served with. Every mark on my skin represents someone who helped carry the weight when I couldn't do it alone. That's the real lesson, Rodriguez. Leadership isn't about being strong enough to carry everything yourself. It's about being wise enough to know when to share the load." Rodriguez nodded, understanding for the first time that the journey he had started in that briefing room was far from over. The training had taught him skills, tactics, and techniques. But the real education, the kind that came with experience and hard-earned wisdom, was just beginning. Over the following months, Rodriguez deployed with his first operational team to the Middle East. The missions were classified, the details unimportant for this story. What mattered was that everything Marcus had taught him, everything the training had prepared him for, came into sharp focus under the pressure of real-world operations. There were moments when Rodriguez had to make life-or-death decisions with incomplete information. Moments when the weight of responsibility felt crushing. Moments when he understood exactly what Marcus meant about the cost of leadership. But there were also moments when his training, his preparation, and his understanding of teamwork meant the difference between mission success and mission failure. Rodriguez earned his first combat decorations during that deployment. But more importantly, he earned the respect of his teammates and the confidence that comes with proving yourself under fire. When he returned to the United States, he was no longer the cocky recruit who had mocked an old man's tattoos. He was a seasoned operator who understood the difference between confidence and arrogance, between leadership and authority. 5 years later, Rodriguez found himself in a position he had never expected. He was selected to become an instructor at the Naval Special Warfare Center, responsible for training the next generation of SEAL candidates. The irony wasn't lost on him. He was now the one standing in front of a classroom full of young warriors who thought they knew everything. His first class consisted of 22 recent BUD/S graduates, all of them displaying the same mixture of physical prowess and psychological arrogance that Rodriguez remembered from his own early days. They were faster, stronger, and technically more skilled than any previous generation. They were also completely unprepared for the realities of leadership under fire. Rodriguez began his first lecture the same way Marcus had begun his. He stood at the podium, scanning the room, letting the silence build until it became uncomfortable. He looked at each candidate individually, seeing reflections of his younger self in their faces. Finally, he spoke. His voice carried the authority that came with experience, but also the humility that came with understanding the cost of that experience. "You gentlemen are here because you think you're the best of the best. You've survived BUD/S, you've earned your tridents, and you believe you're ready for anything the world can throw at you." He paused, letting his words sink in. "You're wrong. Not about your skills, not about your training, not about your potential. You're wrong about being ready. Because readiness isn't something you achieve. It's something you discover under fire. What I'm here to teach you is how to discover it without getting yourself or your teammates killed in the process." Rodriguez began to tell them stories. Not about his own exploits, but about the men who had taught him. About Marcus Stone and the lessons learned in a briefing room years earlier. About Sarah Chun and the discipline required for precision shooting. About Master Chief Peterson and the difference between leadership and management. He told them about the weight they would have to carry, not as individuals, but as members of a team. About the decisions they would have to make with incomplete information and insufficient time. About the cost of those decisions and the responsibility that came with wearing the uniform. But most importantly, he told them about the privilege of service. About the honor of standing between evil and innocence, between chaos and order, between those who would do harm and those who depended on protection. about the trust placed in them by the American people and the obligation to prove worthy of that trust. As Rodriguez spoke, he watched the faces of his students change. The swagger remained, but it was tempered now with something approaching humility. The confidence remained, but it was grounded in understanding rather than assumption. They were beginning to comprehend the difference between being dangerous and being lethal, between being feared and being respected. During the break between sessions, a young candidate approached Rodriguez. His name was Kevin Walsh, a 24-year-old from Boston who had graduated first in his BUD/S class. He had the same mixture of physical perfection and psychological confidence that Rodriguez remembered from his own early days. "Instructor Rodriguez," Walsh said, "how do we know if we're worthy of the trust you're talking about? How do we know if we're good enough to carry that weight?" Rodriguez smiled, remembering asking Sarah Chun a similar question years earlier. "You don't know, Walsh. That's the point. None of us knew. Marcus Stone didn't know when he first deployed to Panama. I didn't know when I first deployed to Afghanistan. The worthiness isn't something you start with. It's something you earn through service, through sacrifice, through proving yourself under conditions that test everything you think you know about yourself." He paused, looking at the young candidate with something approaching paternal pride. "But here's the secret, Walsh. The fact that you're asking the question means you're already on the right path. The ones who worry about being worthy usually are. It's the ones who assume they're worthy that you have to watch out for." That evening, Rodriguez sat in his office reviewing the training schedules for the coming weeks. His walls were decorated with photographs from his operational deployments, commendations from successful missions, and letters from teammates who had served under his leadership. But his eyes were drawn to a single framed photograph on his desk. It showed Marcus Stone standing with Rodriguez's graduating class 5 years earlier. Marcus looked exactly as Rodriguez remembered him, weathered, scarred, carrying the visible weight of decades of service. But his eyes held something that Rodriguez hadn't noticed at the time. Not just the 1,000-yard stare of a combat veteran, but the quiet satisfaction of a teacher who had successfully passed on hard-earned wisdom to the next generation. Rodriguez picked up the photograph, studying Marcus's face. He thought about the lessons learned in that briefing room years earlier, about the importance of respect, humility, and understanding the cost of service, about the weight that came with leadership and the responsibility of carrying it properly. Most importantly, he thought about the circular nature of military service, about how lessons passed from one generation to the next, each time adapted to new challenges but maintaining their essential truth, about how the young warriors he was now training would one day stand in front of their own classrooms, passing on the wisdom they had earned through experience to another generation of idealistic recruits. Rodriguez opened his desk drawer and pulled out a small wooden box. Inside was a single tattoo needle and a bottle of India ink. He had carried them for 3 years, ever since his first combat deployment, but had never used them. He had never felt ready to permanently mark his skin with the symbols of his service. Tonight felt different. Tonight, he understood that readiness wasn't about feeling prepared. It was about accepting responsibility for the lessons you had learned and the obligation to pass them on. Rodriguez had earned his place in the long line of warriors who served not for glory or recognition, but for the simple purpose of protecting those who could not protect themselves. He began to sketch a small design on a piece of paper. Not something elaborate or artistic, but something meaningful. A simple outline of the seal trident, positioned over his heart. Not to show off his achievements, but to remind himself of the weight he carried and the responsibility that came with it. As Rodriguez prepared to make his first tattoo, he thought about Marcus Stone, about the faded ink on weathered arms that told stories of service, sacrifice, and survival, about the lesson that respect wasn't about appearance or assumption, but about understanding and humility. He thought about the young candidates in his classroom, so similar to himself 5 years earlier, about their journey from arrogance to understanding, from confidence to wisdom, from individuals to members of something larger than themselves, about his responsibility to guide them through that transformation without breaking their spirit or dimming their determination. Most importantly, he thought about the future, about the missions yet to be completed, the challenges yet to be faced, the next generation of warriors yet to be trained, about the continuous cycle of service that connected every SEAL who had ever earned the trident, from the oldest veterans to the newest recruits. Rodriguez picked up the tattoo needle and began his work. The ink flowed slowly, tracing the outline of the trident with deliberate precision. Each line represented a choice, a moment of truth, a lesson learned through experience rather than instruction. The pain was sharp but bearable, a physical reminder of the cost of the transformation he had undergone. As he worked, Rodriguez thought about the inscription he would add beneath the trident. Not his name or his achievements, but a simple phrase that captured the essence of everything Marcus Stone had taught him. For words that summarized the responsibility of leadership, the weight of service, and the obligation to future generations. When he finished, Rodriguez looked at his work in the mirror. The tattoo was small, simple, and positioned where only he would see it. But it carried the weight of years of service, training, and understanding. It was his receipt, as Marcus had called it, his permanent reminder of the transformation from young warrior to seasoned leader. The inscription beneath the trident read simply, "Never forget the weight." Rodriguez cleaned the tattoo carefully, applied bandages, and put away his supplies. Tomorrow he would return to his classroom, continue training the next generation of SEAL operators, and carry forward the lessons he had learned from Marcus Stone and countless others who had served before him. But tonight, he sat quietly in his office, feeling the sting of fresh ink and the satisfaction of understanding his place in the long tradition of warriors who served not for personal glory, but for something far more important. For the protection of innocence, the preservation of freedom, and the continuation of values worth defending. Outside his window, Rodriguez could see the lights of San Diego stretching toward the horizon. Millions of people going about their lives, secure in the knowledge that someone stood watch in the darkness, ready to respond to threats they would never see, prepared to make sacrifices they would never fully understand. Rodriguez understood now what Marcus had meant about the tattoos being receipts for lives lived, deaths dodged, and brothers buried. But he also understood something else. They were promises. Promises to future generations that the lessons learned through blood and sacrifice would not be forgotten. Promises that the weight of service would be carried with honor and dignity. Promises that the circle of teaching and learning, of sacrifice and service, would continue. As Rodriguez prepared to leave his office, he took one last look at the photograph of Marcus Stone. The old warrior's face seemed to nod in approval, as if recognizing that another link in the chain of service had been forged. Another teacher had been prepared. Another generation would carry the weight forward. Rodriguez turned off the lights and walked out into the California night. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new students, new opportunities to pass on the wisdom he had earned. But tonight, he carried the satisfaction of understanding his purpose and the quiet pride that came with accepting responsibility for something larger than himself. The weight would always be there. The responsibility would never diminish. But Rodriguez had learned the most important lesson of all. The weight was not meant to be carried alone. It was shared among brothers and sisters in arms, passed from one generation to the next, and distributed among all those who chose to serve something greater than themselves. In the distance, the ocean waves continued their eternal rhythm against the shore. The same waves that had witnessed countless generations of warriors preparing for service, returning from deployment, and passing on their knowledge to those who would follow. The same waves that would witness future generations making the same commitment, accepting the same responsibility, and carrying the same weight forward into an uncertain but protected future. Rodriguez walked toward his car, his fresh tattoo hidden beneath his uniform, but burning with the fire of commitment renewed. He was no longer the young recruit who had mocked an old man's scars. He was no longer the student learning from experienced instructors. He was now the teacher, the guardian of tradition, the carrier of weight earned through service and sacrifice. And somewhere in the darkness of night, in classrooms and barracks around the world, other young warriors were beginning their own journeys from arrogance to understanding, from individuality to brotherhood, from students to teachers in the endless cycle of military service. The weight would be carried forward. The lessons would be passed on. The circle would remain unbroken. And Marcus Stone's legacy would live on in every classroom where respect was taught, humility was learned, and the true cost of freedom was finally understood by those brave enough to pay it.